Yeah. So the idea is basically to create a simple project in Python. Okay. And this kind of template can be used all across, what do you say, different types of projects, anywhere, in the, what do you say, anytime you want to create a new software project, or, you want to create a new software product as well. So you can use this as a skeletal project as such. Okay. So first thing first, I would like you all to mute yourselves. Okay. And so we'll do like a 20-minute, walkthrough in this. And once we are done with the 20 minutes, so we'll have like question answers at the end of that. Okay. So let me begin. Now, when you create a particular project, we have what is known as a development environment. You've got staging environments, you've got production environment. Now, when you're talking about development environment, this is pretty much what I'm doing on my local setup, okay, on my local desktop or on my laptop as such. Okay, so typically when you do such a particular project, you can have a problem where you're using hundreds of libraries. Usually, a developer, he'll be working on he could be working on one project, he could be working on 2 or 100 projects, and all these different projects could be of different types, and they could need different environments. So when it comes to that particular point, you need to make sure that your dependency. So you have what is known as dependency. So for example, my project, I would say, is a Python project. Okay, and I basically will make sure that it's a REST API project, which is which is built on top of Flask. Okay, so that's the kind of project which I would probably go with as such. Okay, now let's start with so when you create such projects, we have to make sure that the dependency, so the dependencies which I talked about is basically Flask. Okay, I talked about making it REST based, so I probably use a library like requests. I'd probably use other particular libraries as well. But the thing is, when you work on multiple projects, it is not necessary that you would be working with a single dependency. You might have hundreds of dependencies across multiple projects. So when you're working on a single project, you need to have that set of dependencies only, which is why we use what is known as a virtual environment. Okay, so I believe most of you already have an idea of what virtual environment is. Okay, if you do not have an idea, just go and find about this package called virtual environment, and so basically it's known as virtual env. So find about this particular package and just install it on your system. Okay, and then you'll see how exactly to make something like that happen. Okay, now what I am going to do, okay, is basically show you some of the Linux commands which I use, which are common across Mac and Linux as such. Okay, and I'll be doing it completely on the terminal. Okay, so you'll have Linux commands, you have Python, you've got virtual environment, and a couple of other things which developer in the industry does day to day as such. So we'll start from scratch. Okay, now first what I'll do is I want to use my Python 3 project. Sorry, Python 3 interpreter. So I'll just do this particular command, which is known as Python 3. So which tells the actual location of my Python on the system. Okay. So when I do that, I'll basically so I want to create a virtual environment. So you can simply do virtual environment, and you can just give name of an environment saying something like env my project or something like that. But what I want is I want a specific Python version, which is why I do this. Virtual env -p, then I take this, I just take this, okay, and I would say env, I would probably call this as Python REST, okay, or let's do this, let's call it Flask REST to make it much more better. You should always remember that when it comes to working on college projects versus working on actual industry-based projects, we are very specific about naming as well. Naming convention, because we spend more time thinking about naming, because you want to make things much more clearer to whoever is going to work on this project next. Okay, so the clearer the name, the better the chances are your project is going to be much more acceptable, much more beautiful, much more readable as well. Okay, so let me do this. So once I do this, what it does is it finds this virtual env is a package which finds the local Python installation, and it creates its own environment in itself. Okay, it creates its own environment, and you'll see that when I do this, I would have what is known as basically a directory by the name env Flask rest. So if I do ls, okay, so I would have this particular thing, env Flask rest. Okay, so now how do I make use of this particular thing? So let me do this. Pip Freeze. I hope you all know what pip is. Pip is basically a Python installation, package as such. So basically, package installation for Python as such. So what it does is you have lots of Python modules out there, and Pip is one of the Pip is one of the projects which allow you to install any Python module on your local system as such. Okay, now let me do this. Pip Freeze will do, it'll freeze your dependencies on the system, and you'll see I've got like number of dependencies over here. Okay, so I've got SciPy, I've got VirtualBox API, I've got Zope, I've got PyOpenSSL, and a whole lot of others. I don't have a lot comparatively because I usually use virtual environment. This is more for my local development setup itself. Okay, now I showed you that I created this particular virtual environment, but how do I make use of it? Okay, so I do this source env Flask rest. Okay, but that is not it. Then activate. So I need to activate this particular environment. It's not enough if I just create it. To make use of it, I need to be able to activate that environment. So once I activate the environment, okay, you'll see that all of a sudden there is this env Flask rest which comes up on my cursor part of it as such over here. Okay, just before all of my paths, this particular thing shows up, which means that I am inside the virtual environment. Now, just to confirm that I have a clean environment, if I do pip freeze, you will see that I don't get an output. Whereas earlier when I did pip freeze, I got an output. That's because whenever you create a new virtual environment, remember a new virtual environment, it would be clean. It wouldn't have anything at all in there. Okay. Now, when I said we are going to create a new project which is based off of Flask, it means to say I need to install Flask using pip. Okay. Now, what is Flask is, you might ask. Flask is basically a web framework which is commonly used in the industry to create, there are lots of REST APIs. It's used to create, basically it's server-side Python web framework as such, which allows you to create Python, web APIs. You can create HTML pages, all of these things which are served from the server. And today what we will do is we'll create simple REST APIs as such. Okay, so once I do this, I'll install another thing known as requests. So Flask will create our, create this particular thing called the Flask web framework. It will install all of this. Request allows you to, request various, create requests to various, different types of REST API calls as such, or even regular calls as well, regular HTTP calls as well. Okay. Now, once I do this pip install request, I'm I'm set up when it comes to my dependencies. So the best thing is you can go on adding dependencies and it won't disturb the rest of your setup. So if I do pip freeze right now, you will see I've got only a couple of items, which are, Flask and request and the dependencies which come along with that. So automatically all these dependencies are already installed. Okay. Now, when it comes to creating a particular, project, we start with what is known as a skeletal structure. Okay, so what I would do is mkdir. I'll start with creating a simple project folder. Let's call it say my Flask, or let's think about a much more what do you say, creative name. So let's call it what could our application do? So we'll say we'll call it student management. I'll call it student underscore management. Okay, so if I were to be a little bit more, what do you say, specific about it, I'd probably do it something like this. I would create it as what do you say, camel case. This is known as camel case because you've got the capital letters, of each basic word as such. Okay, student management. So I'm going to create something like this. Okay, cd student management. Okay, and then I'm going to start with what is known as a basic skeletal structure. So when it comes to a basic Python skeletal structure, what do I need? So let me do the usual stuff. Is basically I would do touch readme.md. Now touch is a command which basically just creates a file without actually writing anything into it as such. It's just there. It just creates an empty file. And then I would probably create a directory called mkdir tests. So usually you create these tests directory so that you can write your own unit tests and integration tests and functional tests, all these different types of tests. And then you create something like mkdir. Say, since I want to create like APIs for my project, I would probably create it, calling it APIs as such. Okay, mkdir API. Or if I don't want it to be right outside, I could probably put it inside one more thing as well. So inside one more layer. So for now, I'll just keep it right on top. This is like a basic structure as such. Okay, and then you can have one more called docs and something known as scripts. So usually you keep this. So if you do an ls minus lrta, okay, you'll be able to see this basic structure as such. You have these readme.md, you've got your tests, API, docs, and scripts. So basically the idea is the readme will contain all the information regarding your project as such, what exactly you intend to do with the project, and stuff like that. Tests would contain all the various tests that you're going to write into that particular thing to do unit testing, integration testing, functional testing. APIs would contain all my Flask APIs. Docs will contain, the documentation, whatever additional documentation you want to put in. Scripts will contain usually, one-off scripts, database-based scripts, and stuff like that, which you want to, use as such on your particular project. Okay. Now let's go one step further. Okay, that's not the only thing which I want. So when it comes to a Flask project, I'd also do this, touch app.py, okay, and touch run.py. Okay, I usually have these particular things, ready in my directory as well. Okay, to be able to, what do you say, call various APIs as such, to run that particular frame, basically web server as such. Okay. Now, let's go one more step. Now, when it comes to all of this, okay, what happens is that in the APIs, okay, so your APIs need to behave like what is known as modules, okay? So when it comes to Python modules, every time you create a Python module, you usually create what is known as an init.py file, okay, an initialization file. Okay, which is why I create an API /_init_py file, which goes, so basically it will go under the API directory as such. Okay, and usually you also have like the similar thing for tests as well, where we create an init.py file because you want your test to be a set of modules. Okay, now typically when it comes to a Python project, okay, specifically a Python project, okay, we want to have what is known as a requirements file. Now, what is this requirements file? So as you all saw that when I did Pip Freeze earlier, okay, these are your requirements, to run your particular project. These are the requirements which you need to run your project. So what do I usually have to do, to make sure, I keep in line? Okay, so I basically do something like this, Pip Freeze, and I redirect into this file called requirements.txt, and you'll see what is there in requirements.txt, which is, so when I do cat requirements.txt, it'll cat all the information which is there. So basically what I did in Pip Freeze would be put into the requirements.txt file. So if I do ls minus lrta, you'll see the current, the current directory structure. This is your basic, the basic of the basic directory structure when it comes to creating a simple Python-based project, okay? And, more likely a Flask-based project, okay? Now, let's, quickly create, a simple, a Flask API maybe, okay? So vi app.py from Flask, so import Flask, okay? Then app is equal to Flask. So these are like, typical things that we do to make sure that, your, application is created. Okay. So from Flask import Flask, app is equal to Flask __ name, just to create that particular app as such. Okay. And I then go into run.py. Okay. And I do import app. Okay, sorry, not import app. I would do from app import app, because this app points to that, that particular file, and this app points to that application which we created inside that particular file. Okay, so from app import app. Okay, then app. So if __ name is equal to _ in. Okay, so I would do app.run, then post equals to 0.0.0.0. So I'll tell you what these things are later when you have questions. Port is equal to 8080. So Flask runs on a default port of 5000. So I'll change it to 8080. Then you have true. Okay. So once I do this, I'll just take it for a quick run to see everything, if everything is like good to go. So let's see. So Python run.py, because I called app from the I called app from within the run. So it says your application is up and ready. But the thing is, with this application, I don't have any actual APIs within it. So let me just go here. Okay. So even if I do something like, so usually, to make simple command line calls to your REST APIs, you use something known as curl. Okay. So curl HTTP localhost. So I did it on 8080. Okay. I don't have any particular, So guys, could you please mute yourselves? Keep yourselves muted for now. I'll, unmute you later. So curl HTTP localhost 8080. And I don't have any routes right now to call. So it'll basically tell nothing found as such, 404, nothing found over here. So you can see at the same time on the web server, you see, there's, nothing which comes up over here. Okay. So let's go into a little bit more. So and _it in API. So we've got init.py, which we don't really want to do anything with. I'll just create a file called roots.py. Okay, and I'll do this. So from Flask, let's do this. Or let's keep it a little simple for now. Let's put in the API part later within the API routes. So I'll just create that so that later we can work on that. Roots.py. And we'll just put the what do you say, API is currently under app.py, and then we can shift it over. Okay, so app is equal to Flask. Okay, and then let's create a particular root, app.root. So whenever you have like an @ something, usually in Python, that's called a decorator. We'll talk about that in the later topics as such, the later classes or whatever. Okay, def. Okay, I'll call it as an index root. Return. So we want something to be returned over here. So from Flask, we don't only want this, we also want JSONify, which, so JSONify, let's keep it a little bit more simple. We'll do this way, import JSON. Okay. And what we'll do is we will return something like this, return JSON.dumps. So JSON.dumps basically converts any particular data structure into a, what do you say, basically a dictionary type of data structure into a, what do you say, a JSON as such, which is a string form of that particular thing. So JSON.dumps. Okay, so what I'll do is message healthy. Okay, and I will save this. Okay, and then I will run python run.py. Okay, and this time when I go and hit that same root, so this is the root which we created, the root called slash. You will see there is a return value which comes up as message healthy. To look at more details, you can do this curl -i, and you'll see the status code which comes along with that as well. 200 OK, and you have the actual return from that particular call as such. Okay, so that's basically how you create a very, very simple structure as such. Now, whenever I create a particular project, I try to make sure that all my specific APIs go under, what do you say, the API directory, so that I can basically move all that information into it as such. So regarding that, we'll probably do it maybe in the next section. Okay, next session as such. All right, so let me just stop sharing.